I never thought I would share something this personal online, but what happened when I was 19 still follows me everywhere. It wasn't a dramatic fight or a moment filled with screaming. It was quiet, calm, and somehow that made it worse. One normal evening, one conversation, and my entire life split into before and after. I was 19 years old, still in school, still living at home, still believing that no matter what went wrong, my family was my safety net. That night, my parents asked me to come into the living room. My father stood with his arms crossed, my mother avoided my eyes, and my sister lingered nearby, watching like she already knew how this would end. My father said they had made a decision and that it was time for me to leave the house. Not next month, not after graduation, not when I had a job. That night, I remember asking what I had done wrong, waiting for a reason that would make it make sense. My mother finally spoke and said I was old enough to take care of myself now. I felt something inside me shut down. I wasn't angry yet, I wasn't crying, I was just numb. I tried to explain that I had no savings, no place to go, no plan. My father replied that life doesn't come with plans and that I would figure it out the hard way. The conversation was over before I realized I was begging. I went to my room in a haze and packed the only backpack I owned, a few clothes, some notebooks, and a phone charger I had bought with my own money. When I walked back through the hallway, the front door was already open. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place I was no longer allowed to exist in. I stepped outside and sat down on the cold front steps, hugging my backpack like it was the last thing I owned. I told myself they would come out, call me back, say this was a lesson or a scare. Instead, I heard laughter from inside the house. Not arguing, not guilt, just normal life continuing without me. That was the moment I realized I was truly on my own. I didn't know it yet, but being kicked out at 19 would change how I trusted people, how I loved, and how I survived. They thought this would teach me a lesson. They had no idea they were planting the beginning of a story they would one day regret. The first night after they kicked me out felt unreal, like my body was moving, but my mind hadn't caught up yet. I walked until my legs hurt, carrying that backpack like it was proof that this was actually happening. Every step away from that house made the silence louder, because for the first time there was no room I could return to if things went wrong. I spent that night sitting at a bus stop, watching cars pass by, pretending I was just waiting for a ride instead of waiting for a plan to magically appear. I kept checking my phone, not because anyone was calling, but because I expected a message saying this had all gone too far and I could come back. Nothing came. The screen stayed dark, and with every minute, reality settled in a little deeper. Over the next few weeks, survival became my only goal. I took any job that didn't ask questions, cleaned places people didn't want to look at, worked hours that left me exhausted before the day even ended. I learned how to stretch one meal into two, how to sleep lightly so no one could tell I was afraid, and how to smile at work like my life wasn't quietly falling apart. What hurt more than the struggle was the absence. No calls asking if I was safe, no messages checking if I had eaten. My family acted like distance erased responsibility, like kicking me out had also erased me. I started to understand that this wasn't just about money or space. It was about how easily they let go. Months passed, and something inside me hardened, not into anger but into determination. I stopped waiting for apologies that weren't coming and started building a routine that didn't include them. Every small win mattered, every paycheck, every night I wasn't cold, every morning I woke up and realized I had survived another day on my own. I told myself this was temporary, that once I stood on my feet, things would change. But deep down, a quiet voice kept asking a harder question. If they could abandon me when I was 19 and needed them most, what would happen if I ever needed them again? And that question stayed with me long after my situation began to improve. By the time I was 21, my life looked stable from the outside, but inside I was still carrying everything that night had done to me. I had a steady job, a tiny place I could barely afford, and a routine that kept me moving forward without thinking too much. Stability didn't feel like comfort, it felt like armor. I didn't tell anyone what had happened with my family. When people asked why I lived alone so young, I gave vague answers and changed the subject. It was easier than explaining how quickly love can turn conditional when you stop being convenient. Over time, I learned how to rely on myself in ways I never had before, because relying on anyone else felt dangerous. Then slowly, things started to change. I got promoted at work. I moved into a better apartment. I started building a life that didn't look impressive to others, but felt earned to me. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was actually moving forward, and with every step up, the distance between me and my family grew wider. That's when the messages started, short at first, a birthday text, a casual question about how I was doing. Nothing about the night they kicked me out, nothing about the years of silence, just small attempts to reappear like nothing had ever happened. I didn't know how to respond, because part of me was still waiting for an acknowledgement that never came. One evening, my mother called. I stared at the phone for a long time before answering. She talked about everyday things, about how proud she was of how I had turned out, about how hard those years had been for them. Not once did she ask how it felt to be alone at 19, or what it cost me to get here without them. That call changed something in me. I realized they didn't regret what they did. They regretted that I no longer needed them. They were reaching out now because I had proven I could stand on my own, and suddenly I was worth knowing again. For the first time, I understood the truth clearly. They hadn't come back because they missed me. They came back because the story had changed, and they wanted to be part of the version where I succeeded. After that call, I couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. The more stable my life became, the more present my family suddenly wanted to be. They started asking about my job, my apartment, my plans, questions they never cared to ask when I was struggling just to eat. It felt less like concern and more like curiosity, like they were trying to understand how I had managed without them. They invited me over for dinner one evening, framing it as a chance to reconnect and move forward. I sat there listening, watching how easily they laughed, how comfortable they were acting like nothing had ever broken. No apology came, no acknowledgement of that night. Just stories about their lives and comments about how proud they were of me now. At one point, my father said something that stayed with me. He said, "See, everything worked out the way it was supposed to." He meant it as reassurance, but all I heard was confirmation that they believed kicking me out had been justified, that my pain was acceptable as long as the outcome looked good. Driving home that night, I felt heavier than I had in years. Not because I missed them, but because I finally understood what reconnection would cost me. To be close to them again, I would have to pretend the past didn't matter, that abandonment was just a phase, that survival was proof it hadn't hurt. I started setting boundaries, answering messages less, declining invitations, keeping conversations short. Each time I did, the tone changed. They became confused, then frustrated, then distant. It was clear they wanted the version of me who had succeeded, not the one who remembered being left outside with a backpack at 19. That's when I realized the hardest truth. Rebuilding a relationship with them would mean rewriting my own history, and I wasn't willing to erase what it took to become who I was. I had spent years learning how to stand alone, and I wasn't about to give that up just to make them comfortable. By the time I finally understood what was happening, the decision felt quieter than I expected. There was no big confrontation, no dramatic speech, no moment where I listed everything they had done. I simply stopped trying to fit myself back into a family that only wanted me once I was no longer a burden. They noticed the distance eventually. My mother asked why I didn't call as often. My father hinted that families forgive and forget. My sister said it was time to move on. None of them asked what it felt like to be 19 and unwanted, or what it took to rebuild a life from a front step and a backpack. They wanted peace without accountability. For the first time, I said what I had never allowed myself to say before. I told them that I remembered everything, that being kicked out wasn't a lesson or tough love, it was abandonment. I told them that success didn't erase that night, and that pride after the fact didn't replace support when it mattered. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. They said they did what they thought was best. I told them maybe it was, for them, but I also told them that regret doesn't rewrite history, and forgiveness doesn't mean access. I wasn't angry anymore, and that surprised them. I was calm, certain, and done explaining myself. I left that conversation knowing I had finally chosen myself without apology. I didn't cut them off out of revenge. I stepped back out of self-respect. I had built a life with no safety net, no guarantees, and no one to fall back on, and that life was mine. They kicked me out at 19 and thought time would fix everything. Years later, they realized too late that you can't abandon someone at their lowest point and expect to return once they've survived without you. Some doors close quietly, and once they do, regret is the only thing left on the other side. I am an ancient scholar, and I have listened to this story from beginning to end, and the truth is not complicated, even if it is painful. Family is not defined by blood alone. It is defined by responsibility. And responsibility matters most when someone has nothing to offer in return. To abandon a child at 19 is not discipline. It is not preparation for life. It is a withdrawal of protection at the exact moment it is needed most. And when support disappears in hardship but reappears after success, that is not love finding its way back. That is regret chasing results. This story was never about forgiveness or revenge. It was about consequence. When people teach you to survive without them, they also teach you how to live without them. And once that lesson is learned, it cannot be undone by pride or late apologies. The judgment is clear. Choosing distance after abandonment is not cruelty. It is memory, it is self-respect, and it is the right of anyone who was forced to grow up too early. If this story made you think, if it felt uncomfortably familiar, then you already understand why these stories matter. Like the video, if you believe accountability comes before forgiveness. Subscribe if you want more stories judged with calm, clarity, and ancient wisdom. And remember, some doors close not out of anger, but because they were never meant to be reopened.